Imagine the sheer, paralyzing shock of finding $250,000 tightly wrapped in crisp, uncirculated bands, left behind in a forgotten, battered leather duffel bag. For Elodie Laurent, a struggling, plus-size waitress, drowning every single day under the crushing, suffocating weight of her younger brother's insurmountable medical debt. It felt like the miraculous, heaven-sent answer to her most desperate, tear-soaked prayers. But the money belonged to Franco De Marco, the city's most feared, untouchable, and ruthless Mafia boss, and it absolutely wasn't left by mistake. It was a deadly, cold, and calculated psychological test. What Elodie did next didn't just shock the deeply cynical criminal mastermind to his core, it inadvertently uncovered a deeply buried, venomous betrayal within his own ranks, violently altered the bloody course of a sprawling criminal empire, and proved definitively to the underworld that a woman's unshakable dignity and fierce intelligence are the most dangerous and transformative weapons of all. The neon sign of Bella Notte flickered with a persistent, agonizing, electrical buzz, its broken casting a sickly, intermittent, blood-red glow over the rain-slicked, pothole-ridden pavement of downtown Chicago. Inside the diner, the air was practically breathable as a solid. It was thick, heavy, and saturated with the cloying smell of scorched garlic, cheap, highly acidic marinara sauce that had been sitting on the burner for 12 hours, and the overwhelming, unspoken scent of human exhaustion. Elodie Laurent balanced 3 massive, scalding hot ceramic trays of heavily sauced, overcooked pasta on her forearms. The heat radiated through her thin, faded polyester sleeves, threatening to blister her skin, but her posture remained entirely unyielding. Her chest heaved slightly under her stained uniform, the fabric clinging to her from the humid heat of the industrial kitchen, but her face betrayed absolutely no sign of the physical agony she was enduring. Elodie was a woman of substance, in every conceivable sense of the word. She was beautiful, radiant in fact, with classical, Renaissance-like curves that commanded space rather than shrinking from it. She had thick, lustrous raven hair that she kept hastily pulled back into a messy, utilitarian bun held together by 2 cheap plastic clips, and sharp, profoundly intelligent emerald eyes that missed absolutely nothing in the chaotic dining room. But in a brutal, highly superficial modern world, completely obsessed with hollow angles, fragile frames, and easy targets, her size made her a cruel magnet for the petty minds of small, insignificant men. "Move it, heavy artillery!" barked Marcus, the restaurant's sleazy, string bean of a manager. He was a man whose entire existence seemed built on projecting his own deep insecurities onto his overworked staff. He hovered aggressively near the swinging, grease-stained kitchen doors, a splintered mint toothpick rolling continuously between his yellowed, uneven teeth. His beady eyes glittered with a distinctly petty malice as she walked past. Table 4 has been waiting 20 goddamn minutes for their stale garlic bread. You're moving like molasses in winter tonight, Elodie. Maybe lay off the complimentary bread baskets yourself, huh? We're running a business here, not a charity trough for livestock. Elodie's jaw tightened so fiercely that a sharp, shooting pain radiated up into her temples, but she didn't break her steady stride. She didn't even look his way. She maneuvered gracefully, almost impossibly so, through the tight, cluttered maze of wobbly tables and scattered wooden chairs, performing a silent, deeply humiliating ballet of economic survival. She desperately wanted to dump the scalding marinara directly over Marcus's balding head, but she couldn't afford to snap back. She couldn't afford the sweet, fleeting luxury of pride or a quick, fiery temper. Not when she was teetering so precariously on the absolute edge of an endless abyss. At home, in a drafty, cramped one-bedroom apartment that constantly smelled of mildew and antiseptics, her 12-year-old brother, Julian, lay in a rented medical bed. He was entirely reliant on a loud, rhythmic ventilator to help him breathe through the night, and required a daily cocktail of prohibitively expensive immunosuppressant drugs just to keep his failing kidneys functioning. Every time Elodie looked at her phone, she braced herself for a text from the neighbor she paid under the table to check on him. Her meager, painfully inconsistent tip-dependent wages barely covered the exorbitant interest on his mounting medical treatments, let alone the principal balances. Every single insult Marcus hurled at her, every degrading, sexist or fat-phobic comment that slipped from his sneering mouth, she absorbed like a dry sponge. She mentally translated her deep emotional pain into raw, physical endurance. For Julian, she repeated in her head like a sacred mantra. For Julian, just smile. Keep walking. She delivered the heavy plates to table 4, seamlessly replacing her stoic mask with a warm, incredibly genuine smile that instantly disarmed the grumpy, impatient and complaining patrons. Elodie possessed a rare, quiet, deeply human gift. Her mere presence was inherently comforting. She was a stark, warm, glowing contrast to the cold, unforgiving, violently windy city howling outside the frosted, condensation-streaked windows. I am so sorry for the delay, folks. The kitchen is working as fast as they can tonight, but I made sure they gave you extra cheese on the baked ziti to make up for the wait, she said, her voice a soothing, melodic balm. The angry patrons immediately softened, thanking her profusely and digging into their meals. But inside, far behind the sparkling emerald eyes and the gentle, maternal smile, Elodie was actively crumbling to ash. The bright pink and ominous yellow final notice letters for Julian's hospital bills were currently stacked on her chipped laminate kitchen counter at home like a terrifying house of cards, just waiting for a single stiff breeze to collapse and crush them both. She was drowning in deep, freezing, dark water, treading with everything she had, entirely alone, carrying the crushing, unrelenting weight of the entire world on her beautiful, weary shoulders. In the darkest, most secluded, and poorly lit corner booth of Bella Notte, where the ceiling leaked a slow, methodical drip into a rusted tin bucket, a man sat entirely still. He was nursing a chipped ceramic cup of black, violently bitter, burnt coffee that he had absolutely no intention of finishing. Franco De Marco was fundamentally not a man who belonged in a crumbling, desperate, rat-infested diner on the wrong side of the tracks. He was a terrifying force of nature. He was a towering, broad-shouldered, imposing figure, wrapped in a bespoke, 3-piece charcoal Italian wool suit that cost more than the diner made in a fiscal year. The exquisite tailoring barely contained the dense, coiled, lethal muscle beneath it. His face was a harsh, utterly captivating landscape of sharp, aristocratic angles, a strong, unyielding jawline, and deep, calculating obsidian eyes. This striking, dark perfection was marred only by a thin, jagged, silvery scar running diagonally through his left eyebrow, a permanent, physical souvenir from a violent, blood-soaked youth spent building an empire on cracked concrete, broken bones, and absolute dominance. Franco was the undisputed king of the city's criminal underground, a phantom who moved tens of millions in illicit, untraceable cargo, and commanded an invisible army of lethal, deeply terrified loyalists. But tonight, the king had abandoned his castle. He was deliberately seeking pure, uninterrupted anonymity, hiding in plain sight in the worst, most overlooked part of town simply to clear his head from the venomous vipers he knew were currently slithering through his own ranks. Recently, The air in his organization had grown suffocatingly toxic. 3 major, highly secured shipments had been flawlessly intercepted and seized by the FBI in the last month alone. Federal agents were suddenly circling his legitimate front businesses far too closely, asking far too specific questions. There was a rat, a highly placed, well-informed informant, breathing the same air as him in his inner circle, and the resulting paranoia was a heavy, suffocating, leaden cloak draped over his broad shoulders. From his shadowy, elevated vantage point in the back booth, Franco watched the diner operate. But mostly, he watched the waitress, Elodie. For the past 2 hours, he had studied her with the intense, predatory focus of a hawk, tracking a solitary movement in the grass. He watched Marcus, the pathetic, hollow shell of a manager, verbally berate and humiliate her time and time again. He watched the cruel, dismissive, entitled, and impatient glances of the late-night intoxicated patrons who treated her like an unthinking appliance rather than a human being. And most importantly, most surprisingly, he watched exactly how she handled the relentless onslaught. She possessed a spine forged of absolute, unbreakable steel. She maintained a gentle, radiant smile that seemed to actively defy and push back against the darkness, grime, and cruelty swirling around her. Franco lived his entire life completely surrounded by greedy sycophants who would eagerly, violently sell their own mothers for $1,000. He broke bread daily with monsters who smiled warmly at him, while secretly pressing a poisoned, serrated knife to his back. Yet here, in the darkest, saddest corner of his city, was a woman clearly broken by the harsh, unrelenting economic realities of the world, maintaining an aura of pure, unadulterated, blinding dignity. It intrigued him deeply, and surprisingly, it agitated him immensely. Franco De Marco absolutely did not believe in incorruptible people. It went against the very laws of the universe he had conquered. His entire vast empire was built on the fundamental, cynical philosophy that absolutely everyone had a price, everyone had a breaking point, and, when pushed to the absolute brink of starvation or fear, everyone was inherently, disgustingly selfish. When Elodie eventually came over to his corner booth to top off his lukewarm, terrible coffee, she leaned in slightly to pour the steaming liquid. As she did, Franco caught a distinct, unmistakable glimpse of a bright red, aggressively stamped final notice medical bill peeking out of the front pocket of her stained, flour-dusted apron. He saw the way her knuckles were completely white from chronic stress as she gripped the glass pot. He noticed the faint, exhausted trembling in her delicate fingers. Yet, despite all the physical evidence of her breaking point, her voice was a soft, soothing, melodic hum that instantly calmed his racing, paranoid mind. "Can I get you anything else to warm you up tonight, sir? A slice of pie, maybe?" "It's freezing out there," she offered, her tone entirely devoid of the transactional phoniness he was so used to hearing. Franco stared directly up into her striking emerald eyes. He searched them intensely, looking for the underlying greed, the simmering bitterness, the dark rot that infected everyone else he knew. He looked for the crack in her armor. He found absolutely nothing but exhausted, profound kindness. For a fraction of a second, the hardened, untouchable Mafia boss felt something strange and foreign bloom in his chest. It was an emotion he hadn't felt for another human being in over a decade. Genuine, piercing, undeniable respect. But his deeply ingrained, survival-based cynicism quickly wrestled the steering wheel back from his heart. "Let's see what you're really made of, sweetheart," he thought, his dark mind rapidly formulating a ruthless, spontaneous game. Let's see if that bright, beautiful halo of yours burns away when you are faced with true, undeniable, life-altering temptation." Without uttering a single word, Franco stood up smoothly. He reached into his pocket and casually tossed a crisp, uncreased, perfect $100 bill onto the sticky, crumb-covered table to pay for a $2 cup of coffee. He picked up his heavy, custom-tailored wool overcoat, threw it elegantly over his forearm, and walked out of the diner, disappearing into the freezing, relentless Chicago rain. But he deliberately left something behind, sitting innocently on the cracked, duct-taped vinyl seat of the booth. A battered, unassuming, heavy black leather duffel bag. It was 2 a.m. The restaurant was finally, mercifully, dead empty. The only sounds left in the cavernous, greasy room were the rhythmic, mechanical, sloshing hum of the industrial dishwasher running its final cycle in the back kitchen, and the violent winter wind violently rattling the large, single-pane front glass windows. Elodie was mindlessly wiping down the back row of booths, utilizing a spray bottle of cheap, strong-smelling bleach. Her arms were aching with a dull, deeply familiar, throbbing pain that settled into her joints every night. She was lost in a mental calculation, trying to figure out if she could skip her own meals for the next 3 days to afford Julian's Tuesday medication, when her wet rag suddenly hit something incredibly heavy and unyielding on the vinyl seat. She froze. The black leather duffel bag sat there like a dark, silent gargoyle, hiding in the shadows of the corner booth. Elodie instantly remembered the terrifying, ruggedly handsome man with the silver scar, the incredibly expensive suit, and the intense, unblinking, predatory stare. He must have forgotten it in his rush to leave. Elodie slowly reached out. Her fingers were trembling slightly as she grabbed the heavy, cold brass zipper of the bag. It was stiff, clearly well made and heavy-duty, but the metal teeth parted smoothly as she pulled. As the leather flap opened, Elodie's breath hitched so violently in her throat, she actually choked on the stale diner air. Stacks, row after perfect, mesmerizing row of thick, banded, crisp, green $100 bills. Her mind went entirely blank, functioning for a moment only on pure, stunned static. This was immediately followed by a massive, dizzying explosion of adrenaline that made her ears ring loudly. She had never seen this much physical money in her entire life, not even depicted on television. Her eyes frantically darted over the bands. It had to be at least $250,000, maybe pushing $300,000. The sheer, overwhelming gravitational pull of the paper currency tugged violently at her chest. This bag wasn't just money. This was Julian's life secured for the next 5 years. This was an immediate, miraculous release from the crippling, chest-crushing anxiety that kept her staring at the ceiling every single night. This was the definitive, triumphant end of Marcus's abuse. The end of her aching, swollen, blistered feet. The end of the suffocating, degrading terror of systemic, inescapable poverty. All she had to do was zip the heavy bag shut, throw it over her shoulder, walk out the back fire escape door, and completely disappear into the rainy night. No one would know. The scary man with the scar hadn't left a name. Suddenly, the heavy, aggressive, slapping footsteps of Marcus's cheap dress shoes echoed loudly from the kitchen tile, snapping her violently out of her fantasy. "Hey, you done yet?" Marcus's whiny, irritating voice barked from around the corner. "I ain't paying you time and a half to stand around daydreaming about your next meal. We close in 5. Panic, raw, electric, and utterly terrifying, surged through Elodie's veins like ice water. If Marcus walked around that corner and saw this money, he wouldn't hesitate. He would violently rip the bag from her hands, steal every last cent, and likely fire her to cover his tracks. And worse, much worse, the terrifying, silent, dangerous man who left it would inevitably hunt them both down, skin them alive, and leave them in a ditch to get it back. The money belonged to the underworld. It reeked of danger. Instinct, sharp, immediate, and born of years of survival, took over entirely. Elodie grabbed the heavy leather bag and forcefully shoved it down into the very bottom of the deep, rolling plastic linen cart beside the booth. She frantically buried it under a massive mountain of soiled, damp, aggressively garlic-smelling tablecloths and napkins, smoothing the top just a fraction of a second before Marcus rounded the corner, his small eyes narrowed with deep suspicion. I'm just finishing up the final wipe-down," she stammered, her voice shaking slightly, betraying the massive, erratic pounding of her racing heart. Marcus eyed her carefully, looking her up and down with his familiar, trademark sneer of utter disgust. "Hurry it up, and take that heavy linen cart out to the alley dumpster on your way out. The laundry service isn't coming till Tuesday, and it stinks. I'm locking up the front. Don't dally." Elodie nodded quickly, gripping the plastic rim of the cart. She wheeled the bulky, squeaking container past him, pushing it out the back door and into the freezing, pitch-black alleyway. She was entirely alone in the dark. The icy, relentless rain instantly soaked through her thin uniform, plastering her hair to her forehead and chilling her instantly to the bone. The alley smelled of rotting garbage and wet asphalt. She dug furiously, frantically through the damp, dirty laundry, her hands finally grasping the thick leather handles. She pulled the heavy bag free, clutching it desperately to her chest, feeling the solid, brick-like weight of the cash inside. The devil whispered seductively in her left ear, painting incredibly vivid, colorful visions in her mind's eye. A warm, safe, brightly lit house in the suburbs. Top-tier, world-renowned doctors for Julian. Fresh food. A soft bed. A healthy, laughing brother running through a green yard. It would be so incredibly easy, but then, rising above the storm, came her father's voice. He was a proud, fiercely hard-working union man who had died of black lung with absolutely nothing to his name but his unblemished honor and the love of his children. His voice echoed louder and clearer in her memory than the howling wind. "Our character is the only thing we truly, actually own in this fleeting life, Ellie. It's the one and only thing they can't ever take from you, unless you willingly give it away. The world is gonna try to buy your soul for pennies. Don't let them buy it." Elodie stood in the freezing rain, the $250,000 pressed against her wildly beating heart. She squeezed her eyes shut as hot, bitter tears mingled with the freezing rain on her cheeks. She sighed, a ragged, painful, shuddering breath of ultimate resignation. She slowly unzipped the small, discreet side pocket of the leather bag, blindly searching with her cold fingers for an ID, a driver's license, or a loose business card. Inside the small pocket, she found only one thing, a single, thick, heavy, matte black card. In elegant, minimalist, gold-embossed lettering, it read simply, "The Obsidian Club." She opened her eyes, staring at the gold lettering, catching the faint light of a distant street lamp. She knew exactly what she had to do, even if it meant purposefully walking straight into the yawning, fiery jaws of hell. The very next evening, Elodie stood in the cramped hallway of her apartment, holding the cracked, yellowed plastic receiver of her wall-mounted landline. She called the diner. When Marcus answered, barking his usual abrasive greeting, she simply said, "I quit, Marcus," and immediately hung up. The phone rang instantly. She knew Marcus was screaming on the other end, ready to threaten to completely blacklist her from every single restaurant in the greater Chicago area. but she reached down and calmly pulled the phone cord entirely out of the wall jack. She was cutting off his toxic, suffocating voice forever. She walked into her small, poorly lit, cracked bathroom, staring at her reflection in the mirror. She took a deep, shuddering breath, trying to steady her trembling hands. She had spent the absolute last $80 of her emergency savings, money meant for groceries, on a dress for this exact, terrifying moment. It was a simple, yet deeply elegant, heavy burgundy wrap dress. It didn't try to hide her body or shrink her frame to make others comfortable. Instead, it hugged her classical curves perfectly, accentuating her figure, showcasing her inherent, powerful femininity. She armored herself in her size, owning the space she occupied. She applied a bold, striking, unapologetic slash of deep red lipstick. If she was going to actively step into the lion's den, if she was going to willingly face the most dangerous men in the city's violent underworld, she was going to do it looking like a queen, with her head held impossibly high. The Obsidian Club was located entirely across the city, nestled deep within the most exclusive, heavily guarded, absurdly affluent district of downtown. The streets here were pristine, devoid of trash, lined with luxury cars and designer boutiques. The club itself was an open secret among the city's elite, a known, glittering, untouchable front for the De Marco crime family's massive money-laundering operations. When Elodie arrived, stepping off the city bus and walking the last 3 blocks in the freezing wind, she felt entirely out of place. The heavy black leather bag was slung securely over her shoulder. She approached the entrance, flanked by 2 massive, imposing bouncers standing behind thick velvet ropes. They looked like professional linebackers squeezed into custom black suits, their tree-trunk arms crossed defensively over their broad chests, instantly blocking her path as she approached. "Lost, sweetheart. The all-you-can-eat late-night discount buffet is 3 blocks down that way." The larger guard sneered, his voice dripping with condescension. His dark eyes dropped to her wide hips with blatant, cruel mockery, completely dismissing her as a human being. Elodie didn't flinch. She didn't look down at her shoes. She didn't apologize. Instead, she took a bold, assertive step directly into his personal space, tilting her chin up aggressively, forcing him to look directly into her burning emerald eyes. "I am not lost, and I am here to see the owner," Elodie stated, her voice projecting a low, dangerous calm she didn't know she possessed. "Tell him the waitress from Bella Notte is here to return his forgotten property, and I highly suggest you do it quickly." The guard laughed, a harsh, grating, ugly sound that echoed off the brick facade. "Listen, lady, I don't know what kind of scam you're running, but the boss doesn't see walk-ins, especially not—" Before he could finish his insult, Elodie swiftly unzipped the top of the heavy bag just a tiny fraction of an inch, just enough to reveal the unmistakable, illuminated flash of perfectly banded green stacks of hundreds. The guard's cruel laughter died instantly, choking in his thick throat. His eyes bulged, darting from the bag to Elodie's unwavering gaze. He swallowed hard, his entire demeanor shifting from arrogant mockery to sudden, tense professionalism. He raised a hand, pressing a finger to his ear, and spoke rapidly and inaudibly into his hidden wrist microphone. A long, agonizing, incredibly tense moment passed. The freezing wind whipped Elodie's hair around her face, but she stood as still as a statue. Finally, the heavy, intricately carved oak doors of the club swung open from the inside with a quiet click. Elodie walked past the stunned guards and stepped inside. She was instantly hit with a massive sensory overload. The interior was draped in plush, sound-dampening red velvet. The air was thick and aromatic, heavily perfumed with expensive imported cigar smoke, the sharp tang of aged whiskey, and the subtle, metallic scent of underlying danger. Crystal chandeliers cast a dim, golden, moody light over scattered tables occupied by incredibly dangerous, calculating men in expensive suits. As she walked across the main floor, the low, murmuring hum of the club completely ceased. The silence was deafening. Every single eye in the opulent, sprawling room turned to look directly at her. She felt exactly like a lone, unprotected sheep, willingly walking into a den of starving, rabid wolves. Her heart hammered against her ribs like a trapped bird. But she ruthlessly pinned her shoulders back, keeping her spine perfectly, rigidly straight. Her hips swayed with a slow, deliberate, confident rhythm that commanded the room's absolute, stunned silence. She was not a victim, begging for crumbs. She was a woman carrying a king's ransom, walking straight toward the devil himself, and projecting an aura of being completely, entirely unafraid. She was escorted silently by a massive man in a grey suit up a winding, grand, gold-leafed spiral staircase. At the top, he opened a heavy door and led her into a massive, cavernous, perfectly soundproofed office that overlooked the bustling club floor below through thick, tinted, bulletproof glass windows. Behind a sprawling, wildly expensive mahogany desk sat Franco De Marco. In the well-lit room, he looked even more imposing and terrifying than he had in the dark diner. To his immediate right stood Silvio, his underboss, a wiry, twitchy, nervous-looking man with cold, dead reptilian eyes, a slicked-back widow's peak, and a permanent, deeply cruel scowl etched permanently into his thin, pale face. Franco's dark eyes widened almost imperceptibly as Elodie confidently walked into the room. He had absolutely, fundamentally not expected this specific outcome. He had fully expected his men to inform him she had never showed up. He had expected her to run, to gleefully steal the cash to pay off her mounting, crushing bills, thereby proving his dark, depressing theory that humanity, when adequately pushed into a corner, was inherently, predictably, and universally corrupt. Instead, she stood proudly before him. She looked breathtakingly beautiful, surprisingly fearless, and utterly, powerfully imposing in her deep burgundy armor. "Leave us," Franco ordered softly. His voice wasn't a yell. It was a low, resonant rumble that vibrated ominously through the expensive hardwood floorboards, demanding absolute compliance. "Boss, I should really stay. We don't know who sent her. She could be wired." Silvio began immediately, his voice a reedy, anxious whine. His right hand instinctively dropped, resting heavily on the obvious, square bulge beneath the fabric of his tailored suit jacket. I said, "Leave us, Silvio. Now." Franco didn't raise his voice, but his tone shifted, allowing zero room for debate. The temperature in the room seemed to drop 10 degrees. Silvio visibly ground his teeth. He glared at Elodie with a look of unvarnished, intense hatred that she found confusing, and then spun on his heel, exiting the room and deliberately slamming the heavy oak door behind him. Franco leaned back slowly in his high-backed, tufted leather chair, steepling his long, scarred fingers together, watching her carefully. "Elodie Laurent, the waitress. You didn't run." Elodie stepped forward, hoisted the heavy leather bag, and slammed it forcefully down dead center onto the pristine, polished mahogany desk. It landed with a heavy, satisfying, definitive thud that echoed loudly in the quiet, soundproofed room. "You left this in my section, on purpose," she said, her voice steady and loud. "I believe it's yours." Franco stood up slowly, deliberately buttoning the center button of his suit jacket. He walked around the massive desk, moving with the terrifying, silent grace of a large jungle cat. He circled her slowly, like a seasoned predator assessing a strange, totally unknown, new prey. His dark eyes aggressively took in every single detail of her face, searching desperately for the lie, the deception, the hidden angle he believed absolutely had to be there. "Do you have any actual concept of how much physical money is inside that bag, Elodie?" he asked, his voice low, hovering right next to her ear. "I know exactly what it is," she said, refusing to shrink away from his massive presence. "It's enough money to save my little brother's life 10 times over. It's enough to completely change my entire, miserable, exhausting existence. It's enough to mean I never, ever have to take another food order, wipe down another sticky table, or suffer another pathetic insult from a small-minded man ever again." Franco stopped his circling, standing right in front of her. He was mere inches away, his towering, broad frame casting a heavy, physical shadow completely over her. She could smell the intoxicating, expensive, woodsy notes of his cologne, mixed terrifyingly with the faint, sharp, undeniably metallic scent of gun oil. "Then why did you bring it back?" Franco demanded, his voice dropping to a harsh whisper, almost sounding angry. "Are you impossibly, dangerously stupid? Or are you pretending to be a pure, untouchable saint just to try and extort me for a bigger payout?" "I am neither of those things," Elodie replied. Her voice sharpened into a blade. She tilted her head back, her emerald eyes locking violently and fearlessly onto his dark, cynical ones. "I am desperate. I am deeply, profoundly exhausted. But I am not a thief. You tested me. You sat in my diner. You saw a fat, poor, vulnerable waitress in a dump of a restaurant. You saw the medical bills in my pocket, and you arrogantly assumed my dignity had a cheap, easily purchasable price tag. You assumed I was broken by the world. It doesn't, and I'm not." Franco was stunned into total, absolute silence. No one spoke to him this way. Men of incredible wealth, political influence, and violent power regularly withered into trembling puddles under his unblinking gaze. No one looked him dead in the eye, inches from his face, without sweating or shaking. He slowly reached out for the heavy brass zipper of the bag, intending to open it, pull out a massive stack of banded bills, and force it into her hands as a rightful reward for her bizarre, frustrating integrity. But as his fingers brushed the metal, Elodie took a sudden, highly aggressive step forward. Her hand shot out, clamping fiercely and strongly over his thick, scarred wrist. "Don't open it yet," she whispered. Her tone entirely lost its angry defiance, suddenly shifting into something urgently, terrifyingly cautious. Franco froze instantly, his muscles tensed, ready for an attack. He looked down at her soft, surprisingly strong hand, gripping his wrist tightly, then slowly brought his dark, calculating gaze back up to her wide emerald eyes. "Excuse me?" he asked, his voice laced with a lethal warning. "When I was hiding the bag from my manager last night," Elodie explained, her voice dropping to a low, intense, deeply rushed murmur, as if she feared the walls were listening. "I was frantically shoving it down into a laundry cart, and when I pressed my hands against the bottom of the bag, I felt something hard, something highly irregular, stitched deeply and securely into the thick canvas lining at the very bottom beneath the leather. It wasn't just cash inside this bag, Mr. De Marco. So, before I came here tonight, I went home, I took a sharp paring knife from my kitchen drawer, and I made a tiny, imperceptible slit at the base of the lining." Franco's entire massive body went completely, rigidly stiff. The muscles in his sharp jaw ticked furiously. He recognized the tone of a survivor, and she was speaking it fluently. "And what exactly did you find, Elodie?" Elodie let go of his wrist. She reached into the discreet neckline of her burgundy dress and pulled out a small, heavy, matte black, highly encrypted USB drive. She placed it deliberately and slowly onto the polished mahogany desk between them. letting the small clink sound fill the silence. I don't know exactly what twisted, dangerous, violent world you live in, Mr. De Marco, she whispered fiercely. But in my world, when someone leaves $250,000 completely unattended in a dive bar on the bad side of town, it's not a generous gift. And it's sure as hell not a psychological test. It's a trap. I took that drive. I plugged it into a heavily firewalled public library computer on my way here, and I opened it. It's a massive, highly detailed digital ledger. Franco stared at the small black rectangle as if it were a live, ticking grenade. It has names, Elodie continued, her voice shaking slightly with the sheer magnitude of the information. It has dates, offshore routing numbers, shell company designations. It maps out highly specific, multi-million-dollar bank transfers connecting your specific front businesses to 2 federal judges and 3 state senators. It's an itemized receipt of massive political corruption. And worse. Elodie reached into her pocket and pulled out a tiny, blinking black square. Pressed tightly right beside the drive, wrapped thickly in black electrical tape, was this. An active, military-grade GPS tracker. Franco's blood ran instantly, terrifyingly ice-cold. The disparate, confusing pieces of the last month's puzzle violently slammed together in his brilliant, calculating mind with terrifying, nauseating clarity. The money in that specific duffel bag wasn't just a spontaneous, random test he had grabbed out of a safe for Elodie. That specific bag was originally scheduled as a highly sensitive, routine cash drop intended for a corrupt port official earlier that week. A drop that had been mysteriously cancelled at the last minute. He had tasked Silvio, and only Silvio, with preparing that specific bag, stuffing it with that exact amount of untraceable cash, and securing it in the vault. Silvio was the absolute only person in his entire organization who had physically handled that bag before Franco impulsively grabbed it on his way out the door to clear his head at the diner. Silvio had planted the damning digital ledger. Silvio had planted the active tracker. If Elodie had actually stolen the money like Franco fully, cynically assumed she would have taken it straight home. Silvio's active GPS tracker would have eventually led the FBI raid teams directly to her crumbling apartment. The feds would burst in, terrified, and find the money. They would easily frame the poor, desperate waitress as Franco's anonymous money courier. When they tore the bag apart, they would find the encrypted ledger. It was the exact, highly specific, undeniable physical evidence the Department of Justice desperately needed to finally take down Franco's entire sprawling empire under the RICO Act, and they would do it all while keeping Silvio's treacherous hands completely, legally clean. It would allow the cowardly underboss to stage a completely bloodless, sanctioned coup, stepping effortlessly over Franco's federally indicted body to take the throne of the city. Elodie hadn't just passed his arrogant, cynical morality test. She had completely, inadvertently dismantled a massive, flawlessly planned, lethal assassination of his character, his permanent freedom, and his entire life's work. Franco looked down at the incredible, brilliant woman standing before him. The entire narrative of his violent life had just violently flipped on its axis in the span of 30 seconds. She wasn't a desperate, pathetic peasant returning a king's gold for a pat on the head. She was the brilliant, profoundly observant queen who had just walked into the throne room and saved the king's life from the assassin lurking directly in his own court. Before Franco could even open his mouth to fully process the massive magnitude of her words, the heavy oak office door burst violently open. The wood splintered against the wall stop. Silvio stood in the doorway, chest heaving. His pale face was completely contorted with a mixture of sheer, unadulterated panic and blind rage. A sleek, highly customized black silenced pistol was gripped tightly in his trembling right hand, the barrel raised and sweeping the room. Silvio had been anxiously monitoring the GPS tracker app on his encrypted burner phone all evening, waiting for the FBI to raid a cheap apartment. He had realized with mounting, suffocating horror that the signal wasn't transmitting from some rat hole on the south side. It was transmitting directly from inside the walls of Franco's impenetrable office. The plan had completely imploded. "Step away from the pig, Franco," Silvio sneered, his voice cracking with hysteria. He raised the barrel, aiming the dark, hollow muzzle directly at the center of Elodie's forehead. "She's a rat. She's working for the feds. She clearly saw too much." Elodie gasped, a sharp, terrified sound. Her hands flew to her mouth as she stumbled backward in her high heels, her brave, unshakable facade instantly, violently shattering in the very real face of a loaded weapon pointed at her brain. But Franco moved with a terrifying, blinding, instinctual speed that defied his massive size. He didn't think, he simply reacted. He reached out with his left arm, grabbed Elodie firmly by the waist, and forcefully yanked her heavy, beautiful frame violently behind his own broad back. He made himself an absolute, impenetrable human shield, completely covering her from Silvio's line of sight. Simultaneously, his right hand dove beneath his tailored jacket, drawing his own heavy caliber, Silver Desert Eagle from his shoulder holster, in one fluid, impossibly practiced motion. "You planted the ledger, Silvio," Franco stated. The room grew incredibly cold. His voice was entirely devoid of all human warmth, dropping to a demonic, hollow, resonant register that promised nothing but immediate death. "You sold me out to the feds to try and steal my chair. You're the rat." "You're getting weak, boss. You're getting soft and stupid," Silvio shouted back, his eyes wide, bloodshot, and completely manic. His hand was shaking violently on the grip of his gun, his finger hovering over the trigger. "Testing waitresses? Handing out charity in slums? You're a massive liability to the family. The feds promised me full, sweeping immunity and complete control of your entire operation if I just delivered that ledger to them. And this fat cow just ruined 6 months of careful planning." Silvio, driven entirely by sheer panic, misplaced ambition, and the terrifying realization that he was a dead man walking, closed his eyes and pulled the trigger. Pfft! The suppressed weapon coughed. But Franco was a hardened survivor of 100 bloody street wars. His reflexes and spatial awareness were absolutely unparalleled. He slightly shifted his torso just as Silvio fired. The bullet grazed the very edge of Franco's suit jacket, burying itself harmlessly into the mahogany paneling behind them. Franco didn't hesitate. 3 deafening, unsuppressed, thunderous shots echoed rapidly through the opulent enclosed office. The sheer volume of the heavy-caliber weapon in the soundproofed room was physically painful, followed instantly by the loud, tragic shattering of an expensive crystal decanter on the bar cart. Silvio's manic eyes went incredibly wide, freezing in a state of permanent shock. The sleek, silenced pistol slipped completely from his suddenly numb fingers, clattering onto the hardwood floor. His knees buckled instantly as 3 massive, dark red blossoms of blood rapidly bloomed and connected across the center of his pristine, custom-tailored white shirt. He crumpled heavily, face first to the floor, dead before his cheek even hit the intricate, hand-woven patterns of the Persian rug. A ringing, suffocating silence descended rapidly on the room, smelling heavily of bitter cordite and copper. The silence was broken only by the horrific, desperate sound of Elodie violently hyperventilating. She slid slowly down the side of the heavy mahogany desk, her legs unable to support her weight, collapsing onto the floor. She clutched her chest desperately, as hot, terrified tears streamed endlessly down her face. She was just a waitress. She worried about bread baskets and tips. She had never, ever seen a gun fired in anger, let alone watched a human being die violently, bleeding out right in front of her shoes. Franco stared at Silvio's lifeless body for 2 seconds, ensuring the threat was neutralized, then slowly, carefully holstered his smoking weapon. The deeply ruthless, cold-blooded monster inside him had been instantly unleashed to protect his territory and his life. But as he looked down at Elodie, curled into a tight, trembling ball on the floor, the monster instantly receded into the shadows. It was entirely replaced by a profound, overwhelming, all-consuming urge to protect her. He dropped heavily to his knees beside her, completely and utterly heedless of the growing pool of Silvio's blood soaking rapidly into the knees of his incredibly expensive trousers. He reached out and gently, incredibly tenderly, took her freezing, trembling hands in his large, calloused, fiercely warm ones. "Look at me," he commanded softly, his voice a stark, soothing contrast to the violence that had just occurred. His large thumbs brushed rhythmically over her white knuckles. "Elodie, look at me." Elodie squeezed her eyes shut, sobbing, but she forced them open, her tear-filled, terrified emerald eyes locking intensely onto his calm, steady, dark ones. "You are absolutely not what that treacherous piece of garbage just called you," Franco said, his voice vibrating with a fierce, protective, and entirely undeniable intensity that seemed to wrap around her like a warm blanket. "You are the bravest, sharpest, most remarkably intelligent and beautiful woman I have ever had the profound privilege to meet. You saved my life, my freedom, and my entire legacy tonight, Elodie. And I swear to you right now, on my life, my honor, and absolutely everything I own in this world, you will never, ever suffer or be afraid in this city again." The very next morning, the crisp, bright morning sun broke triumphantly through the thick, gray Chicago clouds, casting a hopeful, piercing golden light over the grimy, wet streets of the city. Elodie, completely exhausted to her very bones, her nerves entirely fried, and running on 0 hours of sleep, walked slowly into the back door of Bella Notte for her grueling morning shift. Her mind was a chaotic, spinning whirlwind. She was still reeling from the visceral, deafening violence of the night before, the horrific sight of the spreading blood on the rug, and the terrifying, deeply magnetic, wildly protective aura of Franco De Marco kneeling beside her. She felt like she was floating outside of her own body. Marcus was already waiting for her near the rusted metal time clock in the kitchen hallway. He was holding a clipboard, his arms crossed, wearing a deeply permanent, self-satisfied scowl. "You're 30 minutes late, you completely worthless waste of space," Marcus hissed, his voice echoing off the greasy tile. "And you quit over the phone yesterday. You think you can just waltz back in here? Pack out your filthy, smelly locker right now. You're permanently fired. I'm blacklisting you. I don't tolerate lazy, fat, insubordinate." The rusted, brass bell above the diner's front glass door jingled loudly, cutting him off. The temperature in the greasy, humid room seemed to plummet a terrifying 10 degrees in an absolute instant. Franco De Marco walked in. But he absolutely wasn't hiding in the dark shadows or wearing a discreet trench coat today. He was dressed impeccably in a sharp, navy blue, double-breasted suit that screamed immense wealth. He exuded an aura of pure, terrifying, unadulterated authority. He was flanked closely by 2 massive, stone-faced men in matching tailored suits who stepped inside, immediately deadbolted the front door behind them, and calmly flipped the plastic sign to "Closed." Franco walked straight through the dining room, ignoring the tables. He bypassed the terrified, completely frozen morning patrons, his dark, lethal eyes locked dead and unblinking onto Marcus, who was standing by the kitchen doors. Who the hell are you?" Marcus stammered, his voice jumping up an octave. He stepped backward so fast he violently bumped his spine into the metal prep counter. His bullying, arrogant, loud bravado instantly, completely vanished in the overwhelming face of true, unapologetic, apex predator power. Franco didn't answer right away. He reached slowly, deliberately, into his breast pocket and pulled out a thick, folded stack of heavily notarized legal documents. He raised his hand and slammed them violently onto the metal counter right next to Marcus's hand with a crack like a gunshot. "I am the new owner of this establishment," Franco stated clearly, his voice carrying easily across the silent diner. "I bought the building, the land it sits on, the LLC, and the entire business outright in cash an hour ago from the holding company. And you?" Franco leaned his massive frame in incredibly close, invading Marcus's space until they were inches apart. His voice dropped to a lethal, terrifying whisper that made Marcus physically, violently tremble. "Are immediately terminated. In fact, you're permanently evicted. I also bought your apartment building on 5th Street this morning. If I ever, for the rest of your miserable life, see your pathetic face within 100 yards of this woman again, I will have you buried alive, standing up, under the new concrete foundation I'm pouring for the high-rise next door. Run! Now!" Marcus didn't need to be told twice. He dropped his clipboard, his face entirely devoid of blood, and sprinted frantically out the back kitchen fire door, leaving a pathetic, sniveling trail of sheer cowardice behind him. Franco slowly turned his back on the door and looked at Elodie. The terrifying, ruthless, untouchable mob boss melted away entirely in an instant. He was replaced by a man looking at a woman with profound, unguarded, almost reverent adoration. "The restaurant is entirely yours, Elodie," Franco said softly, gesturing to the papers. "The deed is legally in your name, free and clear. I've already arranged for my people to bring in a fully staffed team of professional chefs and managers by noon, and I've fully funded a complete top-to-bottom renovation account for you to design it however you see fit." Elodie vigorously shook her head, tears instantly welling up in her red-rimmed eyes. She was utterly, completely overwhelmed by the massive whiplash of her new reality. "Franco, no. I can't accept this. This is millions of dollars. I told you last night, I absolutely didn't return the money for a reward." "I know you didn't," Franco said, taking a slow, gentle step closer to her. He reached out, his massive hand surprisingly gentle as he delicately tucked a stray, damp lock of raven hair behind her ear. His thumb brushed her cheek. "And that absolute, stunning purity of heart is exactly why you deserve it more than anyone else in this city. But that's not all." He paused, letting out a soft breath. "I also had my personal accountants contact the hospital board. They paid off Julian's medical debts, every single cent, past, present, and fully preparing for future care. He's being moved via private, staffed ambulance to the VIP, luxury pediatric suite at St. Jude's this afternoon. He has a private team of specialists. He's going to get the absolute best care in the world, Elodie." At the sound of Julian's name and the confirmation of his safety, Elodie completely, finally broke. The immense, crushing weight of the world, the heavy, invisible lead armor she had forced herself to wear every single day for years just to survive the grind of poverty, finally shattered completely into a million tiny, sparkling pieces. She let out a loud, breathless sob and collapsed forward, falling directly into Franco's broad chest. She cried uncontrollably, burying her wet face deep into the lapel of his expensive suit, her hands gripping the fabric as if he were the only solid thing left on earth. Franco immediately wrapped his incredibly strong, highly protective arms tightly around her back, pulling her flush against him, holding her securely and fiercely. As he rested his chin gently on the top of her dark hair, breathing in her scent, he realized with staggering, life-altering clarity that in all his violent, chaotic, bloody years of building a dark, criminal empire, this was the very first time he had ever actually built something truly beautiful. 6 months later, the sad, dilapidated corner of downtown Chicago was utterly unrecognizable. The old, greasy, depressing diner had been completely gutted down to the studs and brilliantly transformed into Elodie's. It was an elegant, bustling, highly successful, and critically acclaimed, reservations-only Italian restaurant. The air inside was no longer thick with grease. It was filled with the intoxicating scent of authentic, shaved truffles, rich, slow-simmered red wine reductions, roasting garlic, and the bright, infectious sound of joyous laughter. The food, prepared by a Michelin star chef, was spectacular, but absolutely everyone in the city knew the true, beating soul of the place was its brilliant, radiant owner. Elodie walked gracefully through the packed, candle-lit dining room. She was wearing a stunning, custom-tailored, deep emerald green silk dress that celebrated, showcased, and perfectly hugged her glorious, powerful figure. She laughed genuinely with her regular customers, commanded her large, fiercely loyal staff with deep, empathetic kindness and absolute mutual respect, and radiated a powerful, undeniable, bright inner beauty that completely captivated the entire room the moment she stepped onto the floor. She was absolutely no longer a victim, desperately surviving day to day. She was a beloved, confident queen, holding court in her own rightful, flourishing kingdom. But far more importantly than the success of the restaurant, Julian was responding beautifully to his newly funded, experimental treatments. His deadly disease was officially in aggressive remission. He no longer needed the ventilator. The bright, healthy sound of his loud, infectious laughter could be heard echoing warmly from the private, velvet-roped VIP booth in the very back of the restaurant, where he was eating a massive bowl of gelato. Sitting quietly in that exact same VIP booth, sipping a crystal glass of rare, incredibly expensive Barolo wine, was Franco De Marco. He watched Elodie maneuver effortlessly through the crowded room with a look of quiet, absolute, unwavering devotion. He was a profoundly changed man. The incredibly violent, eye-opening events of that fateful, rainy night had shifted his entire worldview and life's trajectory. He had spent the last 6 months systematically, ruthlessly dismantling the most violent, illicit factions of his organization. He had purposefully stepped back from the brutal, bloody front lines, utilizing his immense, generational wealth to rapidly legitimize his empire through real estate and legal holdings. He was no longer guided by paranoia and violence. He was guided firmly now by the unwavering, pure moral compass of the brilliant woman who had inadvertently saved his life and very intentionally saved his darkened soul. Elodie finished her rounds, warmly saying goodnight to the mayor at table 4. She wiped her hands on a clean linen towel and slid happily into the plush leather booth, sitting incredibly close next to Franco. Franco immediately set his wineglass down. He reached over, taking her soft hand in his, bringing it slowly to his lips and kissing her knuckles gently, deeply, and reverently. "You look absolutely, completely breathtaking tonight, Mia Regina," he whispered, his dark eyes filled with a glowing, intense warmth that was reserved entirely for her. Elodie smiled, a bright, unburdened, beautifully free smile that reached all the way to her emerald eyes. She leaned her head comfortably against his broad, incredibly solid shoulder, feeling the steady, calming beat of his heart. "And you," she teased softly, nudging his ribs, "look like a man who finally learned how to leave a proper tip for his waitress without accidentally causing a massive, violent international incident." Franco threw his head back and laughed. It was a rich, genuine, incredibly deep sound that had been entirely, tragically absent from his life for decades before the moment she walked into it. He had deliberately left a massive bag of money on a diner seat to cruelly test a struggling waitress, desperately hoping to prove to himself that the world was inherently ugly, transactional, and corrupt. Instead, Elodie Laurent had proved to him, far beyond a single shadow of a doubt, that true, inner beauty, unyielding, fierce courage, and pure, unshakable dignity possessed the absolute power to drag even the darkest, most cynical king violently out of the shadows and permanently into the light. The $250,000 had been a petty, cynical test. But the real, ultimate, life-altering prize was a new life, and a profound, burning love built entirely on an absolute, unbreakable foundation of mutual, undeniable respect. Thank you so much for taking the time to watch this incredibly powerful, deeply emotional story of human resilience, unwavering dignity in the face of despair, and totally unexpected moral redemption. Elodie's incredible, deeply inspiring journey proves to us all that our true, actual worth in this world is never, ever defined by our physical size, the petty opinions of small minds, or the stressful balances in our bank accounts. It is defined solely by the unbreakable strength of our character when faced with massive temptation. It shows that even the absolute darkest, most hardened criminal hearts can be completely, beautifully transformed by a single, powerful act of pure, fearless honesty. If this story touched your heart, inspired you to be stronger, or kept you completely on the edge of your seat until the very end, please hit that like button right now. Share it with your friends and family who might need a powerful reminder that good, deeply honest people still exist out there in the world. And please, don't forget to subscribe to the channel and ring the notification bell so you never miss out on our thrilling, emotional daily drama stories. Let us know down in the comments below, what would you honestly have done if you were alone and found that forgotten, mysterious bag of money? See you all in the next video.